I'm super delighted to welcome you all from all over the world who are joining us for this live Journalism Creators Summit. It is an exciting series of sessions we've got planned. I know people are settling into the room, so we will be beginning very shortly with the first live session. I want to give you a quick preview of what's ahead in the day. First of all, in the chat, as you're arriving, please do share where you're joining from and what you do or what you're working on. We have a fantastic slate of sessions ahead, beginning in a few minutes with our first panel on how to get your first paid subscribers. So we're going to hear from Alicia Kennedy, J.R. Raphael, Priti Patnaik, all moderated by the amazing Crystal Knapp. It's an amazing group. They'll give you specific tactics, real talk about the myths out there and the nuances of the reality of being a creator, being an independent creator. After that, we're going to have in about an hour, the second session, how to do 25 things in 24 hours, which is basically our way of talking about the juggling of responsibilities that we all have as independents. You'll get some practical tips, also some surprising nuggets of wisdom from Tanmoy Goswami and Pam Covarrubias. Then we have a lunch chat at 1 p.m. Eastern about getting unstuck and sort of breaking past the plateaus that we sometimes all face. After that, we have a third terrific panel on collaboration. So we're all only individuals, but with collaborators, we can do so much more. So we'll have Jay Klaus, Amanda McLaughlin, Andrew Huang will join as moderator. We'll join moderator Ambreen Ali to talk about how independent journalists can do more by finding partners, both for creating content together, but also for distribution, reaching more people and monetization, finding ways to make some money. And then we'll wrap up the day with some takeaways. We're going to, Ambreen and Crystal and I will gather again and share some of the highlights and some of the nuggets from the prior sessions and some tidbits from the case studies, which we're launching today. We are super, super thrilled to be launching these 6 case studies today, featuring many of the presenters you're going to hear from shortly. These are very detailed analyses of what works in this creator ecosystem, what challenges people face, specific tactics people use. They focus on monetization, distribution, growth. They focus on all the basic things that we need to do and to know as independent journalists and independent creators. And we think they'll be really, really useful for you. They're intended to be very practical. They're not academic. They're not theoretical. They're very practical. And they're full of tables and examples and takeaways. So we think they'll be hopefully really useful for you. And we want to thank the Meta Journalism Project for supporting this and for supporting the Journalism Creators Program in general from the start. And I also want to personally just thank everyone who's been involved in this summit, including all the people you're going to hear from. And we'll get to them very shortly. I see lots of people sharing in the chat. Again, if you haven't yet introduced yourself in the chat, share where you are joining from and what you're working on. And we have a quick poll, which is just to see who's in the room at the moment, and whether you're a creator yourself or you're going to be a creator, and whether you support creators. And I'll give you a moment to answer that. I see about 2/3 of the people are responded. Okay, so I'm going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2. A few last people are responding, and see if you can guess what people will say. What's the character of the group here? And I'm going to end the poll, even though people are still joining. Welcome, by the way, if you're just joining. We're about to get going. Just been introducing the panels that we have. We have an exciting day coming up. Here's the poll results. So it looks like we have a lot of people have already launched something. So about half people here have already launched something, a newsletter, a podcast, website. About 1/3 are planning to launch something in the future. So hopefully you'll get some tips and ideas and reminders and mistakes to avoid, lessons that have already been learned, and you don't have to repeat those. And then we have about 1/5 of the people here who aren't creators, but support creators in their work. So thank you for sharing those responses. And that gives us a good sense of who's in the room, at least at the moment. We have, as I said earlier, an amazing array of of people here. I want to give a shout out to Regio, who runs the J+ unit, to Anita Delina, who helped us start this whole J+ thing, to all my colleagues who are helping run this day today. We're all around to help if something, questions are coming up or you need anything. And with that, I want to turn it over to Crystal to jump into this topic and to kick off this first session on how to get people to actually pay for the thing that you do. The monetization is so important. We have to sustain ourselves. We have to pay our rent and survive. And for that, we need to, in some way, generate some revenue. One of the ways in which we can do that is to have people pay for the work that we create. So Crystal, who's a creator herself and has created numerous things in really successful ways, is a wonderful person to host. She's also the author of several of these case studies, which you'll read about in more detail, the people you're hearing from. So thanks, Crystal, for all the work you're doing and for hosting this. And the floor is yours. And I'm excited for the day, and I'll see you all soon.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. We're really happy to have you all joining us for our first session, How Creators Reach Their First 10, 100, and 1,000 Paid Subscribers. If you haven't already, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. If you're a CUNY Entrepreneurial Journalism Creator Program alum, go ahead and note in the chat what cohort you are part of, and shout out to my cohort 2. A big thanks to our panelists for this session: Alicia Kennedy, creator of the newsletter From the Desk of Alicia Kennedy; J.R. Raphael, creator of the newsletter Android Intelligence; and Priti Patnaik, founder of Geneva Health Files. Before they tell you a little bit about themselves, we wanted to hear from you all again, starting with another poll. We queue up that poll. And the question is going to be, how many newsletters, podcasts, or Patreons do you subscribe to? 0, 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 6, or 7 or more paid newsletters, podcasts, or Patreons. We'll give it a few more seconds here. And then and then can we show the results, please? Oh, interesting. 0, 19%, 1 to 2, 37%, 3 to 4, 17, 5 to 6, 7, 11, and 7 plus 17%. Now back to our panelists. Alicia, can you tell us a little bit more about your newsletter?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for being here and for having me. My newsletter is called From the Desk of Alicia Kennedy. It has one free component per week, one paid component per week. I launched it in early 2020, and it's about food, media, culture, and politics, as the paid content is recipes. I have a book coming out next year from Beacon Press called No Meat Required: The Cultural History and Culinary Future of Plant-Based Eating. So a lot of my focus in my work is on plant-based foods.
JR?
Hello. Sorry, it's taking me a second to unmute. Good to be here. So I started Android Intelligence as a newsletter coming up on, 5 years ago now, in the spring of 2018, the early part of that year. But my background's actually in traditional journalism. I started in TV news, and I've actually been writing about Android in some capacity since its very beginning, back when it was still a seed of an idea within Google. So up until this year, really, I considered my main job to be my more traditional editorial work, writing columns, feature stories, and such at websites like Computer World, Fast Company, and The Verge. 2022 is the first year where that balance really shifted for me in the newsletter operation, and everything around it really became a true business and my primary focus. And my external writing became more the side project, in a sense. Still an important part of my overall picture, but it's been an interesting balance. And yeah, I mean, I at this point consider the newsletter and everything around it to be my primary job. So looking forward to talking about it with everybody.
Great. Congrats on your success, JR. Priti?
Hi, everyone. I'm an Indian journalist based in Switzerland. I publish Geneva Health Files, which I launched in April 2020, just as the pandemic of COVID-19 was raging across countries. So I haven't slept much in the last nearly 3 years now. But essentially, Geneva is the capital of global health policy, where it's made. And my goal has been to map the power and politics in the decisions around international health policy, essentially. I do have 2 editions, both paid and free and paid, which is available only to subscribers. A part of it is, what I call intelligent and useful curation. And the second part is exclusive analysis. I promised readers exclusive investigative analysis on global health that no one else covers. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.
And Priti's also an EJCP alum from the first cohort, I believe, right?
That's right, from 2020.
Great. Okay, our first question for panelists. What tactics have worked best for you to gain new paid subscribers, especially early on? We'll start off with you, JR.
Sure. My situation's a little different, I realize, because I had a bit of an established presence, I guess you'd say, on the internet, writing for some mainstream publications, a little bit of social media. Honestly, social media hasn't really been that valuable to me. I know some people get a lot out of it. But in general, what I've really found to be the best source of paying subscribers is a healthy base of free subscribers, people who already know you, who adore what you're doing, and who kind of inherently are the most targeted audience imaginable for whatever your premium product might be. I've tried promoting my premium membership program in a lot of different places, and with extraordinarily rare exception, anywhere other than the free version of the newsletter or an email going out to people who are already receiving that version of the newsletter, it just doesn't work. People in sales talk a lot about this idea of the funnel and, like this path that brings somebody from the point of being a prospective customer to being an actual paying customer in various forms. And I get it. I come from a traditional journalism background. I still have strong hand in the editorial world, and it feels a little icky to talk about that kind of thing and sales and funnels and all that in journalism. But the basic philosophy around that really does apply. So for me, at least, it almost always starts with someone getting interested in what I have to say, the kind of information I'm sharing. And that first step is just getting them to subscribe to the free newsletter and let me into their worlds. That's a big step too, with a lot of trust attached to it. We have to remember, writing a newsletter, that you're putting something into a really personal place in somebody's inbox. You're being invited into there. So it's a lot of responsibility. And once you get that invitation, it's up to you to win that person over with really good, valuable, useful, or just plain interesting content, and then to find the right time, place, and way to present your premium offering and effectively express why it might be worth their while to buy. One more thing I'll just say on that is that I think particularly with smaller, independent, individual run newsletters, you got a couple of different paths to think about with that and how you approach it, and changing your approach and hitting different angles at different times can really give you an advantage in kind of a best of both worlds situation. So if you're doing good work and it's actually resonating with people, which of course is always the qualifying statement to any of this, right? You're bound to encounter a certain subset of readers who simply want to support you because they appreciate what you're doing. Maybe they like the idea of the independent journalism model. A fair amount of my own internal promotions for my premium membership program revolve around that notion. The value of independent journalism, how I essentially work for the readers in this context, operate without any, corporate oversight, external control, how that allows me to present a pure, enjoyable reading experience without all the usual asterisks that come with reading stuff on the web. Reader support allows that kind of model to thrive, and so on. In my occasional member surveys, when I ask about the most important reason people are paying to be members, the most meaningful value they're getting out of it, there's always a really surprising amount of people who say the most important thing to them is simply knowing that they're supporting what I'm doing and supporting independent journalism. So that's important to remember, but realistically, that's only going to get you so far. For most people, you also need to think about what you're providing of actual value that makes it worthwhile for them to pay you for the service. And specifics, of course, will vary from one situation and publication to another. But the one good rule of thumb I'd say to remember is that just offering more of the same isn't enough. You need to be offering something different that has a definite, easy to communicate value and that actually adds something into readers' lives that they aren't already getting. So some broad thoughts there.
Thanks so much, JR. I just want to remind our summit attendees that you can submit questions to our panelists via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to those at the end of our chat here. Alicia, what tactics have worked best for you to gain new paid subscribers?
Well, I agree a lot with JR that it's really important for your paid your paid offering to be very different from your free offering. I think that for me, that's always been a huge turning point for me in wanting to support someone's newsletter. And I subscribe to like a lot of newsletters and Patreons. But like JR, I also had been writing for a long time, had some sort of base of following on social media. So when I did launch my newsletter with paid subscriptions, though I wasn't initially offering any paid content, there were folks who just wanted to sign up as paid subscribers just to support my work. And then when I decided to start offering a paid specific piece of content, it was extremely different from my Monday essays, which are free. And every week I just remind people in that essay post, which always is read by over 20,000 people, that there's what'll come on Friday is for paid subscribers, and there's a button to subscribe. I try not to hit people over the head too much with the idea of paid subscriptions, because I do know that a lot of the time what people want is just to read one newsletter from me per week. That's completely fine. But I do think that when you have a consistent and extremely different paid offering and you consistently share what that is with your free subscribers, they do make that conversion a lot of the time. Your most dedicated readers will make that conversion. And that base of free subscribers to me is really the most significant aspect of making money off of the newsletter. I do not monetize my free newsletter at all. My free newsletter for me, and I've said this too, is like, I treat my newsletter as an anchor gig. It's something that provides me with a regular income. But I really see it as a springboard to get my name out there, to keep writing for magazines, to share in book proposals, to hopefully sell books, to be teaching, to be doing lots of other different things. And so while I see my newsletter as kind of the central flagship of my work, I also see it as a springboard to just keeping my name in people's minds, and also keeping me as a voice on issues around food that I care about. But I do think a lot of the time people discount the significance of a huge free subscriber base, and but I do think that consistent good content to free subscribers is what drives the paid subscriptions.
Well, thanks for that, Priti. What were your thoughts on tactics for gaining paid subscribers?
So when I began, what was unraveling around us sort of contributed to the interest in the newsletter because of the pandemic, as I said, and we were reporting, and it was directly influencing and informing interested readers. So for about 6 to 9 months before going paid, I was offering all of the content for free, and I've been a journalist for over 20 years, and 10 of which has been spent working and reporting in global health. So I knew that a bunch of folks will sign up for the newsletter, and that assumption was sort of proven true. But when I went paid, I was of course very nervous, and I must thank one of the CUNY mentors, Kabir Chiber, for really pushing me over the edge. Because the question to confront here is that, are you going to be viable or not? This is not for charity, and you have to make a living out of it. And how would you do that? And that really compelled me to sort of basically introduce the paywall. And from one day to another, writing for hundreds of free subscribers, that cut down to a fraction of 10 or 15%. The conversion, of course, hit the industry standard. And at first, I must confess, it felt weird. But like I said, that I did have a very good free edition. I still have a very good free edition going out. And then, of course, the exclusive. I agree with the others. I think you have to provide what's of value to the paid subscribers. But it's, what we've also heard, in general from the ecosystem, is that people support you, not also because, what you're offering, what your paid offering is. They support you because they believe in your work. And I think that has sort of holds true for me. But having said that, the other thing is that not a lot of people are interested in the really technical legal stuff what my paid subscribers get. People want the big picture stuff, and I totally concur with Alicia on this, that there is great value in having a big free subscriber list, a free readers list. And that's the other curious thing that happened when I first went paid, which is that the free list just exploded exponentially. And I just couldn't figure out what was happening, because it's not that we would see similar translations into the paid list, but it was still significant. And I still do think that some of the most significant content is provided for free. And I think your free subscribers, you have to let your story fly. That if you can afford to do that, that is. Having said that, you have to be very businesslike in putting some great content behind the paywall. And I think visibility is important. I think for many newsletter creators, newsletter is one central part, maybe 50% of your time or 40% of your time, but the rest is being heard, being seen, talking about the stuff that you do on the newsletter. And I think that's true for me as well. That why should people read your newsletter? Because you have something of value, not just in what you write and publish, but what you have to say. So I think that I think one way of getting also paid subscribers is to give that face time somehow. I feel that that's sort of important. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much. On the flip side, I always think it's good to share with people mistakes or failures we've had. Are there any tactics you tried that failed, or things you just don't recommend people do to get paid subscribers? We'll start with you, Priti, on that one.
Sorry, can you just repeat that?
Oh, sorry, sure. So, failures, are there things you've tried that don't work, that you don't recommend people do? What are things that have failed in terms of tactics?
Right. So the first thing would be to the first suggestion would be to not spread yourself too thin. I was told that you should have at least a number of editions a week, but you don't need to. I think it's important to be consistent, and less is more, really. So I would sort of I wish I could change that. Looking back, that's one. One way to ensure quality and to have a better work-life balance that really does have an impact on your final product. I do think it was a mistake to spread myself too thin in the initial years. And the second one, I had anticipated, a lot of institutional subscriptions. So we did spend a lot of effort chasing institutions to bulk up on the revenues and charging more for institutions and cross-subsidizing individual subscribers. But that assumption hasn't been borne out. I won't say it has completely failed, but that's something that needs to be reviewed, but something that needs to be kept in mind. I wouldn't say that give up on the idea of chasing institutional subscriptions, but I guess you can temper your expectations. And the final mistake, I think, would be to have more pictures. I have had strange feedback from readers sometimes that I publish long form that's 3,000 words length on an average every week. That's a lot for people. And again, this is something to review. It really depends on what you're selling, but something to think about, that you should make the content more friendly. And I do think that a lot of people are zone out because it's too much text. So I won't say it's a mistake, but something to attract and keep subscribers.
Thanks. Alicia, mistakes, failures, things you don't recommend people do?
Well, I think it's just important to pay attention to what people are telling you with their subscriptions, and what I learned was that initially I was doing interviews with transcripts as my paid offering, and then at the end of last year switched to recipes, and my subscriptions just went up like crazy. And while it's a lot more work for me, frankly, it's also, I want to give people what they actually want. And so I learned that the interviews weren't doing the conversions, but the recipes were. And so I went with that, and it's done really well in terms of having a really nice, stable base of paid subscribers. And also I think this is a mistake I'm learning from right now, is that I maybe publish too much in terms of trying to be incredibly consistent. I think is a detriment to my new free subscribers who haven't been following along for over 2 years now. And so I think I'm learning from that I would like to maybe repurpose some older content and bring some of that back, reintroduce myself to old subscribers, but also introduce myself to new subscribers, instead of constantly thinking that I have to provide novelty and new things. You know, I have a huge backlog that I can draw from that will create less work for me and maybe make my readers feel a little better about not always being able to keep up every week with what I'm publishing.
Oh, thanks for that. By the way, I was looking at your recipe list 2 weeks ago. I was like, I have to become a paid subscriber so I can check some of these out. So, JR, mistakes you've made or things you don't recommend people do to gain paid subscribers?
I think a really tempting path to go down, and something that I know early on, particularly with a premium membership program, I toyed with ideas, tried some things, and did different things that ultimately didn't pan out, is trying to be everything for everyone. I'd say it's true for a newsletter in general. It's a pretty specific kind of medium, but especially for a premium paid subscription or membership program, it's an opportunity to serve a very specific niche and sort of reader interest. So you have to kind of accept at a certain point that you aren't going to please every reader all the time. You're going to hear from people who say, hey, I would pay for this if you just did X, Y, or Z. You can't do it all. And if you try to make everybody happy, you're going to kind of end up with a general purpose mishmash that doesn't really make anybody happy. I think for me, having feedback and doing surveys from the most engaged paying members in particular has helped shape that and kind of enlighten me continually along the way. I mean, I try to do it at least once a year, about what really matters, what elements are maybe a little less important, what would make it better, what they aren't getting a lot of value out of. And it's interestingly not always what you would expect. For me early on, for instance, one of pretty much the first paid perk that I offered when I first, the very beginning, just kind of dabbled with a paid membership program, a premium subscription program, was an expanded premium edition of the main flagship Friday newsletter. So for me, it's called Android Intelligence Platinum. It's the Platinum edition of the newsletter. And it had some extra sections, types of information beyond the core basic stuff that everybody sees in that newsletter. Almost more of like a magazine feel. It's kind of expanded over the years to be more interactive. It's customizable. It's a different sort of publication, even though it has the same core elements. And over time, I thought, you know, this is cool, but there needs to be more. I've added lots and lots of other little bits and pieces and benefits into the membership program. And I expected that the newsletter itself and the expanded version of the newsletter would have lost a lot of importance. But consistently over time, a large percentage of people, when I do these surveys, say that that's the most important value to them. And that's kind of been a surprise. And that's helped also shape the way I market and present it, because for a long time, I didn't emphasize that as much, because I thought that's not as interesting and flashy, and there's all this other stuff that you're not getting at all that maybe I should emphasize. But come to find out, it was that original core, very basic and almost mundane seeming thing that was very much in line with what they liked about the newsletter to start with, that has been a hit for people. So yeah, you never know till you ask.
So our next question: some creators believe your best content should go behind a paywall, and others believe it should be free. What are your thoughts on this? And we'll start with Alicia. I know she has a strong opinion on this.
I mean, because it balances also with what Priti said, which is that, you know, your subscribers want the content that's behind the paywall, but they also want to support you. And so I think that your paid content should be, you know, for those people. It should be a little bit more loose, maybe a little, depending on obviously your newsletter. But I find that my paid content is successful when it's a bit looser, a little bit voicier, a little bit more, you're in the kitchen with me and I'm telling you how I'm making something. I'm telling you how I, you know, batch cook something to make sure that we can have a nice meal every day. And so for me, it's hitting that sweet spot between providing in paid content something useful and different, but also understanding that people are there because they want the inside scoop, the background information. They want a little more intimacy with your ideas and your voice. And so for me, like, I wouldn't say the paid content isn't my best content, but I would say that I put the essays on Mondays as free because they're broad, they're meant to be appealing, they're meant to be shared. And for me, the word of mouth on social media, people sharing my work on Twitter or on Instagram has been huge for the growth of my base subscriptions. And so, and also because of the free content being my essays, that means that, that's what editors are reading. That's what, people who might hire me to consult or hire me for other things are reading. They're reading the stuff that is my, kind of the bread and butter of my ideas and my voice. And so, yeah, I think it's cool to have the free content be something for a broader audience and understand that the paid stuff is that intimate, stuff that doesn't have to always be 3,000 words. It doesn't always have to be 1,500 words. It can be like, here's a little morsel of what I'm thinking about this week, and it'll be really appreciated because that's your hardcore base.
Priti, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I sort of touched upon this earlier on, but I think what's important is what I find comfortable is I don't have to over explain the concepts in the paid newsletter, in the sense that, because it is for the committed group of experts who are reading it. It's this really niche community who's paying for this stuff because their job gets informed by reading the newsletter. So to that extent, so the tone is different. And I think that so a lot of people may not, a lot of readers who are on the free list may not actually always appreciate the paid list because maybe it's too technical for them. So I would say that, and my own assessment is because there's a lot of good stuff on the free list, that is what is driving the growth in the free subscriptions, because people like what they see or someone has shared it and that kind of a thing. And the paid list is more organic because people who are really committed to actually knowing more about this stuff, because it's evolving so fast, and we are in this particular news cycle around global health policy. So I think there's a temporality to this as well. That also determines what's paid and what's free. I would leave it at that.
Thanks, JR.
I think it's a tricky balance, and I don't think there is any universal right answer because every publication, every situation is a little bit different. For me, I definitely do put a ton of good, useful, really promotable stuff out as part of the free newsletter. I think it's difficult if you don't do that. Maybe certain really high profile, known name people can get away with that. If, you've got a huge following, people really know who you are, you've got millions who are following you anyway. Yeah, then maybe you can go pure paywall. But I think for most people, having some good content outside of the paywall makes a big difference. For me, I also have my columns and articles and external publications, so that kind of plays a little bit of that role. What I found a dividing line for my situation that makes sense is that when something goes into a level of depth, a type of super specific subject matter that wouldn't typically make sense in a more traditional publication environment, wouldn't really fit into the format of my regular weekly free newsletters, or something also that's an evolving subject that I know will be updating, expanding, revisiting regularly over time. That's something I put behind a paywall, turn into a members only resource. It'll often work out kind of naturally to where I'll talk about some vaguely related subject on a less deep level within the free newsletter. And then a members only resource will be kind of a natural follow-up to that. An opportunity to say, hey, if you like this and you really want to take things to the next level, check out Android Intelligence Platinum, where you'll go way beyond the surface and learn, whatever the specific thing is, X, Y, and Z. With new guidebooks like that coming out every other week, the Platinum community at your fingertips for even more personalized interactive troubleshooting, et cetera, et cetera. So more than anything, I think it's about finding the balance that's right for you and what you're doing, and the line that's not just arbitrary, but that kind of makes sense in your mind and then hopefully in readers' minds of, this is what I'm getting for free. If I want to pay, then I get this too. And in a lot of situations, it probably just takes a little bit of trial and error to figure out exactly where that line is and where that balance really falls for you.
Great, thanks. So we have time for one more question before we get to audience questions. So we have a few more minutes for that. So, first we're going to do our poll. So our other poll, how many newsletters are you signed up for as a free subscriber? 0, 1 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 24, or 25 plus? Give you 5 more seconds there. Let's see here. Oh, interesting. 1 to 5 and 6 to 10 are about the average. I'm subscribed to way too many, and I know some people are subscribed to more than 100 for free, and like we need a group called Newsletters Anonymous or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, yeah. So if you could touch on this one question, because I think it's important before we go to the audience questions. Yeah. So to gain paid subscribers, people have to like what they're reading. So let's talk about the newsletter itself in terms of content, style, formatting. What's important to be successful there? If you could all each make 1 point on that topic. JR, would you like to start?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that's massively important, and it's often underemphasized and treated as an afterthought because understandably, people who write, those of us in this field, tend to focus on the content. That, of course, is the most important, but you also have to think about how it's presented, because if people don't enjoy reading it, if it's hard to look at, if it's hard to digest, then it almost doesn't matter what you say. No one's going to look at it. I've had a pretty substantial evolution with that over time. So my newsletter, the first section of it is 3 things to know this week in the main Friday newsletter. And over time, I've kind of figured out a format that really works. So at this point, it's got almost 3 subsections within that. There's the short version, which is like a 1-sentence summary. There's no more, KNOW, no more, that goes into a little more detail, and then read more, which has a couple of pertinent links if people really want to dive deeper. So that has really been a way for me to approach the content and allow people who just want the quick skim, because that is something I hear a lot. Hey, this is way too long. I just want a quick glance at what's going on. Yeah, they can just read the no more section, skip down to the next item. They're happy. People who want to know more, keep going. People who really want to know more, click through to whatever, whether something I wrote something somewhere else. And interestingly, what I found too is even within that one no more section, I initially wrote that, it's a pretty small paragraph, but a paragraph of text, maybe 3 to 5 sentences. That was a good reminder for me over time that in email, a paragraph of text like that, especially if you're reading on a phone, as a lot of people do, it's like taking up your whole screen. It's a big block. It's kind of visually overwhelming. At a certain point, I evolved that one little subsection into 3 bullet points instead of 1 paragraph. And the feedback I was receiving from readers immediately went from pretty consistent theme of this feels too long, there's a little too much info here, to now very consistent, perfect, so easy to read, just the right amount of information. It's the same exact amount of information. I didn't change what I'm writing, how I'm writing it, what I'm saying, just the presentation. So that can really make a big difference. And then one more quick point, I would just say for voice and style, now more than ever, there are a lot of people putting content out into the world. Authenticity matters, finding your own voice, whether it's folksy, funny, intellectual, witty, whatever makes sense for you and feels like you and isn't being forced, that can really go a long way in a newsletter in particular. Getting back to what we said at the beginning of you being in somebody's personal space, email's a personal medium. You're essentially writing a letter to each individual reader, delivering it into their own personal inbox. So talking to them as an individual person really goes a long way. Getting away from the generic Associated Press news brief writing certainly has its place, but where the individual writer behind the story by design doesn't really matter. It's more about the information, the brand-wide consistency. That can really serve you well here. Readers want to connect to a person and feel like they're talking to you. So finding your voice, whatever it is, really will make a meaningful difference in your ability to stand out from the pack and connect with folks as you're writing to them.
Thanks, JR. Alicia?
So I have a format that I've basically done the entire time. In terms of my free newsletter, it's just a logo, essay, here's the info for the Friday paid post. Here's a picture, usually of something I've cooked or eaten, and then here's what I've published, like either something or a podcast I've appeared on or something like that. Here's what I'm reading. And here's what I'm cooking. And I put a subscribe button right after what I am giving for paid subscribers on Friday, and then another subscribe button right after the cooking portion. So there's 2 opportunities at the end of each Monday free newsletter to sign up. And I think that it's important, of course, to have that look that's consistent. It's the same thing with being consistent in publishing. It's important to have a consistent aesthetic in the newsletter that so people know what they're getting. And a little, for me, a little glimpse into what I'm cooking, what I'm eating is whether it has something to do with the content or not, it works for me. And yeah, to have the two buttons in the same place all the time, so right there for people to hopefully make that conversion. And yeah, I think that making sure that your visuals match the content and match in tone, if not in content necessarily, is really important, to also telling people who you are and what to expect, and that adds to the whole package deal.
Thanks. Priti, anything to add there?
I think I would say that it's very important to come off looking as professional as possible. It also depends on the kind of readership you're servicing. I think I must say I have a pretty unforgiving readership. I get emails like, okay, New York Times did this, and you should get a copy editor. Sure, so people have expectations from a one-person newsroom as they would from a big, giant newsroom with 25 people working on design and so on. I don't eye roll on such comments anymore. I think it's really important to come off looking to the best that you can, error-free, and looking and easy to digest. But also should have your personal touch. Don't be scared to wear your emotion on your sleeve and your heart on your sleeve, and that can reflect in your newsletter. Also depends on what kind of issues you're writing about. But I would say that formatting is important. This is, we are in a place where consumers, readers are in the pole position. So if you are not keeping them happy by the way you're presenting stuff, they will not stick with you, no matter how great your content is.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, great. So all three panelists participated in our case studies, so you can get a lot more great tips from those case studies, but we have a lot of audience questions, so we'll get to the ones we can now, and maybe we can figure out some way to address others later. But have any of you seen an impact on the impact of inflation, fears of recession on your conversion rate for paid subscribers? Does anyone want to answer that? JR, quickly.
I personally have not, and I think this may vary from one subject matter to another. I write about technology. My newsletter is it's called Android Intelligence. I think of it as a newsletter about productivity for people who happen to use Android. It's a little broader than just Android, but so point being, it's not a life or death kind of subject. It's more of something that adds to your life, something you enjoy. And so it's already kind of inherently a little bit of like a discretionary expense, I guess you'd say. I think the kind of person who has the ability to pay for a newsletter will continue, or at least generally has continued to within the realm of reason. And yeah, certainly if somebody money's tight, they're not able to, they're not going to, but in general, it's such a sort of supplementary fun thing for yourself anyway, that it's kind of like if somebody has that extra budget, then they have that extra budget, and if they don't, then they probably weren't going to be paying for a premium subscription anyway, because it's just such an added nicety. So in a way, I guess that's kind of protected it. The same might not be true for big, New York Times publications or something like that, but at least in this specific field.
Alicia or Priti, do you have anything to add to that in terms of recession fears or inflation, or no?
Of course, worry about it. Luckily, I tell people how to cook things, so hopefully people always need that.
I think it's something we'll probably see in the coming months. Also, as the pandemic wanes, this could be something that might go off the radar for some of the readers, but hard to say at this point.
Thank you. So, how soon should you start a paid subscription model if you've just launched? That's a popular question. Priti, yep.
Yesterday, the sooner the better. Really, you really have to go out there and as soon as you launch, introduce a paywall, you'll have a chip on your shoulder, and you'll really feel cool about asking people for content. Please go ahead. And the advice I got early on was, every once in a while you have to do scary stuff, and this is the first of the many scary things that you'll be doing as a person charging for content.
Anyone else want to add to that, JR?
I would just add also, don't feel obligated to come up with some grand offering right out of the gate. You can start really humble, you can start small, you can make it mostly about supporting you, maybe with some little token badges. I mean, it doesn't have to be grand right off the bat. When I started my newsletter at the beginning with absolutely no intent of it ever turning into a business, it was just a side project, a fun thing. I did not anticipate it growing in the way it did. Pretty close to the beginning, I think actually maybe even in the first issue, if not the second or third, I just started up, like at that point it was a Patreon kind of thing where a few different tiers, very just token kind of efforts or rewards rather, nothing of great substance, just because from the beginning there was that percentage of people who said, hey, this is awesome, I'd really like to support it. How can I send in a few bucks a month or whatever? So even just starting with that gives you a base. It establishes the idea that yes, this is something of value. And you get a base of people who like what you're doing and are willing to support it. And then maybe 6 months down the line, you're ready to think about, oh, here's what I could do to add into that. So I'd say start small and start with something and then, build up over time as it makes sense.
A lot of people have questions about your tech stacks. Can you each talk about what platform you're on, Alicia, and any other tools you use for community, things like that, Alicia?
I use Substack. I do not use any community tools. I try not to give my subscribers any work to do, which is why I don't really poll them. I don't really do a Discord. Substack has added a chat. We'll see if I decide to use that. I don't know. And then other than that, I saw people asking about planning and editorial and stuff, and I'm really just still an old school like notebook and planner person, and that's how I plan out my work.
Does anyone else want to talk about their tech stack? JR?
I can go. So I've gone through a few different email service providers over the years. For the last, couple years, give or take, I've been using ConvertKit, which I've been really happy with. It's free at a certain point. Once you start, I don't remember where the cutoff is. Once you have, say, 1,000 or something like that subscribers, you do have to start paying. What I found is that it's a little more geared toward creators as opposed to like some of the more traditional MailChimp kind of ones that are really all about marketing. So it has a lot of interesting tools. It's pleasant to write in, but then it also has some powerful stuff in terms of sequences and automations. You can make it so that if somebody clicks a specific link in your newsletter, say to learn about your premium membership program, they get tagged as being interested in it. You could then automatically follow up with them with a pre-written sequence 2 weeks later saying, hey, just in case you're interested, here's a 10% off coupon. A lot of interesting things you can do. It also opens the door to a lot of advanced welcome sequences. One of the case studies, some of mine are in there. And if you see that, you'll see I have different paths. So when you start, you can say, I'm interested the most about Android or Chrome or Gmail. And based on what happens, you get into these different paths as you get into the newsletter. Beyond that, I use Memberful, which integrates very nicely with ConvertKit. That handles all the premium membership stuff. That connects to my own self-hosted WordPress site. It all just kind of fits together. In the last year and a half, I've started having a membership members only forum that's powered by an open source forum software called Discourse, which is confusingly not the same as Discord. It's more of a traditional forum. Again, all connects very seamlessly with Memberful, WordPress, all that stuff. So it all just plays together nicely without any complicated coding or anything like that.
Priti?
Substack is what I use. It was really easy to set up and get going. But I think if you have the time, capacity, resources for an independent IT setup, you could consider having your own stuff. But I just did not have the luxury of time, IT capability or resources at that point when I started. Yes, very much a traditionalist. Use pen and paper to sort of schedule my editorial publishing calendar, as it were.
Great, thanks. So we're out of time for questions, but I would ask JR, Alicia, and Priti if you want to answer this last one in the chat. People are asking what percentage of your free subscribers you've been able to convert to paid subscribers in a percentage. So if you're okay with sharing that, please put it in the chat. And then we have time for one more poll before we move on to our next session. And can we cue that poll up, please? What's the next step you plan to take in your creator journey? I'll give you a few seconds there to complete that before we see the results. Great, and the results? Excellent. A lot of you want to launch your newsletter podcast. So we hope you'll all check out our case studies to get more advice and tips. That will help you on that creator journey and help you get started. Thanks again so much to our panelists for their generosity with their time, both today and in our interviews for the case studies. It was great talking to you all. And now you won't want to miss our next session, 25 tasks in 24 hours, prioritizing tasks while finding the time for the rest of your lives. See you there. And thanks so much, everyone, for joining us.